So there's the mountains, San Gabriel Mountains, just north of Pasadena. We're arriving at the Graduate Art Complex of Art Center College of Design for the final MFA thesis exhibition show of Steve Gavenas. The show is called Moebius Trip, which is kind of a play on Moebius Strip. So we come into the gallery, and the first thing we see when we're confronted with these folks looking directly at us and this table. And the table I'll explain in a moment. Now this is a series of paintings, and the challenge that the artist set for himself was to have the paintings function in a serial narrative way. So from painting to painting, in a specific order, so clockwise in this case, kind of like panels in a comic strip, so that they collectively add up to a greater meaning. But they've also been hung without titles next to them, because the intention is also that the paintings can be read as individual works without reference to the paintings on the left or the right, or reference to the narrative overall. It's a story from the artist's life, but it's also allegorical of the United States. So it starts here. Home Sweet Mental Home is the title. And this is kind of a metaphorical space representing the consciousness of our hero, or let's call him our anti-hero. And he feels so isolated and alienated that it's as if he's in outer space looking down at the earth. And the swirling mass of rays are thoughts and memories, random, that he can't get out of his mind, that are just always swirling there and obscure his ability to think clearly. If we move closer, we can see that there's actually a little library that he uses to get information that's important to him. And I think you might be able to read it if I just pan across here very briefly. Well, let me just get a shot here without the border. It's kind of nice to just see the rays and the earth, sort of an odd juxtaposition. But he leaves his alienated place and decides to get in the game again. So again, metaphorically, he's not really jumping into the world. He's in the world, but he feels like he's jumping into it. There is a kind of a alternately scary or exciting looking city. Maybe it's at night lit up brightly, or maybe it's actually on fire. Kind of feels like an old George Grosz painting. There's a stadium down there suggesting some competition to come. He's got a backpack and a sleeping bag with backpack is full of cameras, meant to suggest that he's just going on a tourist trip. And we see up here he has some American Express traveler's checks and a return trip ticket. So he's just going out on a trip, but he's conflicted. He has a camouflage suit on, meaning that he wants to kind of hide among the crowd, but he also has these brightly colored patches announcing to everybody certain experiences in his life. And these are patches that are representative of experience in his life. A grid of cats, the octopus on the face, and it says Bros. Retter is German. That's the Iranian patch of the American F-14 program. And he has little patches like football players put on their helmets for achievements. And then we learn in the next painting that his round-trip ticket is actually on a cruise ship. This is called Whoa, It's Kind of Scary. It's looking straight down from his perspective. We see the ship on the surface of the canvas, which functions as the surface of the water. His feet, of course. And whoa, it's kind of scary is meant to say that even though he's going into the safety of a cruise ship environment, he's still kind of reticent about it. So in his mind, again metaphorically, he sort of goes on pause, and that's what this red marks are here, intended to represent. So we can just cruise around here. And the cruise ship is actually kind of a cruise ship battleship. It has these big guns, even though it has a swimming pool. Nice looking swimming pool there. Then we come to his experiences on the cruise ship. And first thing we see, this is called Passengers and Crew. We see some passengers eating hot dogs. And we also see some workers in the background toiling away, swabbing the deck. So let's zoom in and just take a quick look. There's this person. Yum, yum. Actually, the hot dogs look pretty good. A nice shadow there. Let's come across. And there's that one. And there's the workers behind. And they've pulled a shade down, kind of a screen. It doesn't screen too much, but suggesting that they don't even, not only are they not even facing out the window, but they don't even want to see these guys toiling away on their behalf outside. But at a port of call, he gets a job. And so the title of this painting is "Sorry But So Long, My Newfound Friends, I Got a Job." And we see our anti-hero. We finally get to see him at least a little bit on the right in the mirror. And let's zoom in on him. He's got his military hat on, which is meant to suggest the job to come. And he's looking into the ship's galley. We see a waiter carrying a plate of hot dogs, even though the chefs inside are preparing sort of gourmet fancy foods. So, if all he did was return home after taking his cruise, that would be the end of this journey. But since he's decided to take this job, it's kind of like opening a can of worms. Hence, the next work, which is actually a can of worms. So, there it is. He has to travel into the interior to get to the job. So this painting is called "Faster, Colder." He's being driven. He's not driving himself. He's kind of the American imperialist. He doesn't want to enjoy what's there. He just wants to get to his destination. And colder means he wants them to turn up the AC. He surrounds himself with his own screens. Here's a camera that looks vaguely militaristic and Canon-like. So rather than enjoy this scene, he looks at an image of it. And he even looks at an image of a blank screen with the snow on it. And then we see in the rearview mirrors the kind of reproving look of the guy in the front seat. We start to see a little bit more of our anti-hero. And in the other side mirror, we see leaving the cruise ship behind at the dock. So he arrives and he does the job, interviewing refugees to determine whether they're acceptable for resettlement in the United States. And this is a depiction of an actual interview with the table, with the canvas serving as the table. We have hands below representing the interviewer, or our anti-hero. On the left and right are the hands of interpreters, and above are the four kind of reaching and pleading hands of a family of refugees. This painting is called "Interrogation. Don't You Remember That the Little White Box Was the Barracks?" And that's because in making these determinations of whether refugees were acceptable to come to the States, they would make claims to have worked with the American government or military before the communists took over in 1975. And the job of the interviewers was to determine whether those claims were true or not. And the only way to do that was with some flimsy information like, do you remember this particular person who worked with that program? Or if you say you worked at a particular base, here's a schematic of it. And the question would be, where's the barracks? So "don't you remember" is meant to suggest that maybe it's a leading question. Maybe the interviewer feels a little guilty and conflicted about what they're doing and is trying to help the family a little bit. So there was a feeling of wanting to provide the refugees with some sort of dignity, and so this is a painting of a refugee family looking across the table at the interviewer with sort of pleading looks. And the title of this one is "Say Cheese Before I Decide Your Fate." And as we can see, they're pressed in on the sides. The canvas has captured them in a way that they were captured by the interviewer in the process. They were totally in his control, and they're totally in the control here, the way it's painted. They're squeezed in, their arms are all pressed together. They're pressed forward by this grid in the background, and they have this kind of very depersonalized, dehumanizing number, which is actually a number from the refugee camp. So we'll just come forward a little bit and look at their faces. So this is the son. This is the father who had the claim. There's a daughter. And interestingly, she was wearing a shirt that said "Another Ugly American" on it. And this is the mother, who has probably the most worried look on her face. And she has a beautiful Lao design patterned shirt on. They would usually dress up in their absolute best clothes. And so This gentleman is a farmer. He has his rice farmer's traditional Lao blue rice farmer's shirt on. So, after all of these experiences, our anti-hero decides that he needs to open himself up and expose himself. And so we come to this painting, which is called Still Life with Fruits and Nuts. And there's a guy performing some kind of quasi-religious rite with some robes. People are picking at him. They're blowing into him, perhaps blowing knowledge into him, or perhaps sucking the life out of him. Our anti-hero, who looks vaguely like the artist, has a kind of a grin and bear it look on his face. He has, it's kind of like his skin has been stripped away, and we can see all of his guts and veins and everything. And we'll just come along here. One of his testicles is inflated. One is kind of like drained dry, shriveled up to a seed. There's this smoke here, and we can see the source of it. And then there's a little child who doesn't yet know not to touch him. So his mother is kind of worried about him, but he's touching and getting some kind of interesting feeling. And as we move back toward the back, they're actually turning into oranges, apples, and into a still life. And we see down below, there's his camouflage suit, which you can almost think of as his skin. And the shadow of this guy is sucking the life out of or blowing into the skin in the same way that the person is doing to the body up above. Finally, he returns home and hangs up his suit in his closet. This is called Done But More to Do, suggesting that he thinks of each of these trips as a kind of a mission that's now completed, but there is more to do. And we can see a whole bunch of suits that are hung up in the closet, the last of which is the camouflage suit. We can see that on the camouflage suit there are the 4 patches that we saw previously. We can see that there is one more patch, meaning that he's kind of awarded himself a badge of experience, a patch of experience for this particular episode, but he doesn't know what it means yet, so it's still kind of unformed and just question marks. We also see over here on the right-hand side that there are 2 as yet unformed costumes, suits, uniforms, disguises waiting. So that's the point that more to do, done but more to do. And then we can see this crazy graffiti. Down at the bottom we see that there's a few words, but mostly it's just 5 symbols. And as he grows up, he keeps marking more and more. So we see the actual latest ones, and there's Let's Play that's been written over and over and over again over the years. But he never really learns anything because the symbols never change, they never become more sophisticated, it's all just the same symbols over and over. So just like America, perhaps, he doesn't really learn anything from his experiences, so that's another signal that the story will repeat. With this refugee scenario, for example, that will be repeated with Iraq and Afghanistan. And we can come over here and look again at the table and see that there's, in fact, a whole bunch of ideas for the title of the show. And finally, the title of the show, circled in red, Moebius Trip. And then in case it's necessary, there is an actual, I'll go this way, employment application explains a little bit about the refugee scenario. And so here's the map, again, that has the titles of the show. And that is it. That is Moebius Trip. And so it's a kind of a swirl. It's a very full gallery, lots of color, a very, very kind of intense, unrelenting swirl of paintings and of color and of information and narrative, but also opportunities to enjoy each individual painting. So that is Moebius Trip.